guys, this week we're going to be working on watercolor technique, and in this particular watercolor picture we're going to look at atmospheric perspective, which just means that we are going to try to draw something in the sky that appears to have distance. So drawing something that's large, this hot air balloon, and drawing the smaller ones to make it look like they are at different places on the paper. For this project you will need a piece of paper, watercolor, pencil, and 3 circles of differing sizes that you can trace, like this roll of tape and these 2 random bottles. So you're trying to create 3 different watercolor balloons. So we're just going to sketch it out quickly first. And so what I do is I'm just going to trace my first balloon, and then I'll trace my second. I think I'm going to use this smaller one actually. And I want to do these lines of pencil fairly light, because watercolor, depending on what colors you choose, they're not always going to cover up darker pencil lines. I'm doing mine a little darker than you should because you can't see it on the video if I don't. And then I'm just going to sketch out my my hot air balloons. So I'm going to skip, kind of jumped up and so that you can see the one I did here. So all I did is, after I traced this, I drug down these lines. I created the bottom of the hot air balloon in a basket and did the same over there. You can also do the designs. You may just want to paint those freehand. It's easier for me if I do a little sketch first, and then I can go back and do the painting a little bit easier if I have those lines. Once you have your very basic sketch of your water or your hot air balloons, you can start on the watercolor. And the technique that we're going to start on for the sky is something called wet on wet, which we've done at some point during the course of your years in art, which is just that you're going to wet the paper down with just water before you actually add the paint. So I'm just covering the sky with water, and I'm just doing this on the sky. I'm not doing it on the balloon, so I actually want to be a little bit careful as I'm going around the balloons. I don't want the water in the balloons yet, because what you're going to do is this. I'm going to get a little paint and I'm going to add it to the water, and it kind of does its own thing because of the wetness on there. See how it's sort of growing and it becomes sky-like. I don't want the water to be in the balloon, because that same effect will go in the balloon, and we're trying not to do that. One thing I want to back up and just mention before I keep going is that if you want to create this white border, what you can do is to tape your paper down with either some masking tape or some painter's tape all the way around the edge of it, and that way you'll get this really defined line for the perimeter of your paper, and that's just a nice kind of finishing touch. So I wanted to mention that before I keep going on the sky. So I'm going to keep going with colors. The thing about watercolor that you want to remember is that you're working light to dark, which is logical, right? You want to start with the light color and you're going to gradually move to dark. I'm going to start adding a little purple, and the sky is great because you can do anything that you want, right? You're trying to get cool shades. Going to add a little bit of the turquoise. Remembering that to get more sort of bright color, you need more paint and less water. If you want it to be more translucent, you're going to need more water. So you can see how this is sort of growing. That's why it's really important that you not get that water in the inside of the hot air balloon. I'm going to jump ahead. This is where I did my sky. And I did that same effect all the way down onto my horizon line. So my horizon line in this is going to be some sort of green space, and I tried to create the illusion of mountains as well. So when you've gotten your sky all painted in, you can move down to the bottom. One of the things I really enjoyed doing on this particular project was just a mixing of the colors and going back over it. So I tried to show you 3 stages. So you've got our basic sketch. This is sort of stage 2, and then this is the completed one. And what I really enjoyed is that I found that I could really go back and layer many times over the watercolor, especially down below in this grassy area. So again, following that watercolor technique, I started with something light. So I did some of the light greens, and I just used wisps of color trying to create a bit of texture. And then I went back and I added some of the darker colors. Now something that you can kind of play around with is that in the cap of any watercolor palette, you're going to have these little cups, and you might not have a color you want in your watercolor, and so that's what these cups are really great for. Let's say I wanted a more yellow green. I'm just putting a little bit of that green in there and then a little bit of yellow, and sometimes I find that I get a color that I'm not expecting. The other thing I like, which will sound sort of strange, I think, is that I often don't clean the cups out. Usually I like things to be sort of wiped down, but I don't always wipe those out because the little bit of paint that's left often provides me with a color I like. So in this one, it really worked well because I had some sort of browns left in these cups, and mixed with a little bit of green and yellow. It was sort of giving me these good forest colors down here. So the goal here is to create layers of color. So you can see I've got my dark greens and my light greens, and then I wanted to move on and create the mountains. And so and if it's easier for you to sketch those first, you can, but you can also, of course, just paint those. And you're trying to create the peaks and then what would be below it. And again, what I like to do is sort of outline these with the original, just the outline, and then go back and fill in with those colors. The other thing I noticed that I liked doing, or I kind of enjoyed the effect, is that once the other part had dried a bit, I would go back and go over it again. So two different ways. Up top, we're doing a situation where we want it to be wet and we're adding other color. Down below here, we're not doing that. Down below, I'm just letting it dry and then going back over it. Not that you couldn't do wet on wet, but you're kind of going for a different effect, right? The sky's a little more translucent. The grass is a little more opaque, so I want the colors to be a little brighter. So you can go over this many times. And of course, the one thing you want to be careful of in watercolor is that you can go over it very many times, but you do want to let it dry a bit in between. If you keep painting on a very wet paper, it will rip. Even if you have thick paper, it will at some point become weakened from all the water. So just let it dry. It dries really fast, 5 minutes, and it's ready to add some more water. Once I did the sky and the grass and the mountains, then I moved to the balloons, and again, whatever pattern, I was trying to do sort of like a chevron pattern up here, which is just something I remembered seeing on a balloon when I was younger, and so I tried to create that chevron pattern of almost a zigzag. And I also, I'm just kind of going back and adding, I used the watercolors once they had dried to try and create shadow. So just like we've done shadow on other things, you're deciding that the sunlight is coming from one direction, right? And so all of the darker shades on your balloon should be on one side. So I just sort of went back with the colors that I used and did that darker on one side and lighter on the other, just to give sort of the illusion of a rounded balloon. That's something you can also do with your pencil. Once this fully dried, I actually used my pencil and I went back and just sort of defined these lines. You could do it with watercolor too, but I sort of liked the effect of the pencil because it's very gray, and I felt like it worked okay with the basket of the hot air balloon, but you could certainly use paint or marker or whatever you thought. And then I just chose to do some different patterns on the other hot air balloons. So I hope that you give this a try. Really experiment with trying to create the dark and the light of the mountains, of the sky, of whatever greenery you want. We live in such a beautiful state. Just sort of think about what you've seen looking at your window, looking at Grant Park, or maybe if you've been out further, what that might look like. There's lots of different landscapes you could take advantage of. But what I'm hoping you are able to experiment with is that watercolor technique. Wet on wet, and then really going back and layering the colors. As I've mentioned in other weeks, if you don't have watercolors, please let me know. I'm really happy to drop some off so that you could just use them for the remainder of the school year. If you have any questions, let me know. Hope you enjoy. Take care. Bye-bye.